It is 7 p.m. Thursday night along the Queensland coast, and a dangerous situation is beginning to develop with Category 3 Cyclone Marcia continuing to intensify. The latest Bureau of Meteorology forecast is calling for Marcia to attain Category 4 intensity shortly before making landfall just to the east of St. Lawrence, either late tonight or early tomorrow morning, roughly at around 5 a.m., as a Category 4 severe cyclone. The early evening visible satellite animation reveals the true rapid intensification of Cyclone Marcia over the last 6 hours. You can see earlier in the animation that the eye was not very well defined. Marcia was likely no more than around a Category 1, but within the last 3 to 6 hours the cyclone has really gotten its act together. You can see the eye definitely clearing out, and within the last 2 to 3 frames you can also see some of the higher cloud tops wrapping completely around the center, and this is where your eye wall is going to be located. Some of the deeper convection here that annotates where some of the colder and higher cloud tops are. That is going to be where your strongest thunderstorm activity is located, and of course your highest winds. Based on the latest microwave imagery, the inner core of the cyclone is on the small side, but smaller cyclones also tend to take better advantage of some of the more favorable atmospheric conditions, and that is one of the reasons why we are seeing rapid intensification over the last 3 to 6 hours. Based on the latest satellite estimates on the tropical cyclone Dvorak intensity scheme, those numbers are ranging currently between 5 and 6.0, which is indicative of this storm nearing Category 3 major hurricane status if we were going by the Atlantic hurricane scale, and that certainly also fits the Category 4 cyclone criteria that is outlined by the Bureau of Meteorology. What are some of the impacts that can be associated with a severe Category 4 landfall? Well, the first and foremost one is going to be storm surge or sea level water rise right along the coastline. In this case, the main threat will be where the center makes landfall and also areas just to the east, because you're going to have northerly winds along the eastern side of the center, some of your strongest winds embedded within the tropical cyclone, and those winds are going to be the ones that really helps the water to pile up right along these bays and inlets. So if anyone is living or located in any of these locations just to the east of St. Lawrence, you need to move away from the coast as soon as possible. Even if you're in a location that is not as vulnerable to sea level water rise, if you're still fairly close to the coastline, those maximum sustained winds of Category 4 intensity could be strong enough to completely blow off your roof, or if it's unsuccessful in doing so, it could still at least cause significant structural damage. Now, fortunately, Cyclone Marcia will continue to move at a relatively steady speed even after it makes landfall, so inland flooding caused by rainfall will not be quite as severe as it could be. Nonetheless, it's still a threat that should not be taken lightly. As we can see based on the latest American GFS forecast model total accumulated precipitation forecast, we're still looking at the possibility of about 8 to 11 inches of total precipitation from this storm, which also equates to around 200 to as many as 270 millimeters of total precip. So flooding is still a concern even farther inland. Now, as we turn to the latest regional radar animation out of Mackay, Queensland, I don't want you to focus on the trochoidal wobbles that you may see with the overall motion of the eye. It's fairly common for these wobbles to take place within the current movement of a severe tropical cyclone. Be rest assured that the overall southwest motion towards St. Lawrence or areas just to the east is going to continue. You just need to go ahead and look at the average over a 6 to 12 hour period instead of these radar updates that take place every 15 minutes, because they can be somewhat misleading. The main things I want you to take away from this animation, however, are that we are already seeing some squall starting to move inland, and of course as we go deeper on into the evening and early morning hours, conditions are going to rapidly deteriorate in these locations. So now is the time to make your final preps. As a matter of fact, hopefully those preparations have come to a completion several hours ago when we still had daylight. So now is the time to simply hunker down and wait for the storm to pass. These squalls are going to increase in intensity with every passing storm, and it looks as though that we are going to see a risk of isolated tornadoes, and the primary threat with these tornadoes are just very weak and brief spin-ups, mainly along the very outer periphery of these squall bands as they come in. This is more of the most recent GFS model output, and you can see the model is showing a landfall near or just east of St. Lawrence between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. And as alluded to earlier, the main storm surge risk is going to be where the center is making landfall, or locations just to the east as the onshore winds really blow into that area. Now, the storm surge problem won't be quite as severe, especially just to the south of Mackay, because as you can see, the winds are clearly blowing offshore. Now, as we advance the animation later on into the day on tomorrow, you can see that the center is likely going to pass near or just to the west of Rockhampton. The good news is that the maximum sustained winds will decrease significantly by the time the cyclone makes it this far south. Nonetheless, we are still looking at the risk of some potentially damaging winds moving into Rockhampton, along with the threat of very heavy rain and some isolated flooding. It also goes without saying that you still don't want to be anywhere near the coast, as these strong onshore winds will continue to promote the possibility of coastal flooding, and winds are going to easily be well over gale force, and you're still more than likely going to be seeing cyclone force winds between Rockhampton and Gladstone. Finally, a quick look at a more technical perspective regarding the intensity and the forecast landfall intensity of Cyclone Marcia. We're really not expecting much in the way of any chance of weakening before landfall. As you can see, sea surface temperatures are fairly consistent all the way up until the point where the center crosses the coast. Sea surface temperatures are well in excess of 26 degrees Celsius, and that is the favorable benchmark that we often look for in terms of any type of possible tropical cyclone development or intensification. The second most important factor is going to be the threat of wind shear, and we really don't see much in the way of wind shear. As we look at the latest streamline analysis from the University of Wisconsin, we're looking at streamline winds in the mid to upper layers of the atmosphere, and you can see this counterclockwise motion that is indicative of a favorable mid to upper level ridge over much of the Coral Sea, and it's not until the time that the center of Cyclone Marcia crosses the coastline that it will begin to feel the effects of a mid-level trough approaching from eastern Australia. So we could begin to see more in the way of wind shear, but not until after the storm makes landfall. As we take a more regional view, it can become fairly clear as to what the two main steering parameters are. One is a mid-level steering ridge located halfway between Australia and New Caledonia. As you can see here, the counterclockwise motion is supporting a current movement of the cyclone toward the southwest, towards coastal Queensland. And if that weren't enough, we can also see the very slow advancement of a mid-level trough over the interior, and this trough is also promoting a track that is eventually going to allow the cyclone to bend toward the southeast, where it will begin to parallel the Queensland coast. It's also quite remarkable, as you can see once again on the latest one or two frames, just how clearly well defined the cyclone has gotten within such a short period of time. Please continue to follow the Australian Bureau of Meteorology for the latest official updates. And of course, you can always follow us here at 28storms.com and also our social media pages at Twitter and Facebook for supplemental information. So thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you again in the future.